Say welcome everybody. Thanks for jumping on. Well, I'm sure we'll have a couple people that will jump on here in a minute, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can give you guys an agenda and just so you guys can see here a little bit. But I don't know how to share this, but you can see this little bit. But we're going to do an introduction for Eric and I. And then we're going to go into the meat of the webinar and talk about these top risks for entrepreneurs and business owners and talk about the four silent killers to your business valuation and protection. And then we'll get into what can you do to take a step forward to seeing if that's an issue for you. And but this is going to be really conversational between Eric and I, and give you some background where we are both in a mastermind together and have had a lot of cool stuff evolve in there. And so we just decided we wanted to partner together, and we have a lot of correlation in our business and a lot of similar deals or things that we work with. But we wanted to jump on and give you guys hopefully some good value. And this is recorded, so we will distribute this on our YouTube channel and cut it up for some shorts on social media. So if you don't get a chance, we'll blast an email out to everybody with this clip or with a link to it so you guys can access it afterwards. So without further ado, let's do this. Let's start off. Eric Jeppson, the man, the myth, the legend. Why don't you go kick us off and just give us an introduction about you and what your firm is about.
Yeah, I've been practicing law for 25 years. Started at big law, was for about 4 years in that setting, and then decided to hang out my own shingle. And so that's been going on for 22, almost 23 years now. So it's been a fantastic journey. Most of my time, in fact, almost all of my time has been spent in representing business owners, property owners, business owners. And initially, it was all sort of focused around litigation. That's what the department I was in when I was working for the big law firm. And then when I hung out my own shingle and went forward from there, still do a lot of litigation just to get people out of their troubles and problems and disputes, but have focused a lot more on helping them avoid them altogether in the first place. So my practice has evolved into meeting my clients, getting them out of their disputes or whatever issues they got going on, and then helping them get their business together so that they can largely, if not entirely, avoid the courtroom, any litigation or any of the sort. So I've been doing that now, and I've had my own firm since 2003, and I'm loving it. And I'm feeling privileged to function and operate in the way I am.
That's awesome. And married kids?
Like I am married,
tall
yes.
Guy.
Thankfully, I've got the best wife, and I have 7 children. The oldest is just turned 27 or 28, and the youngest is 15.
That's awesome. You're in Utah, right?
Yeah, so I've practiced my whole life and lived for 21 years. Well, I grew up in California, but I lived in Northern California for 21 years, raised most of the family there, but have relocated to Utah about almost 4 years ago. And I have my practice both in California and in Utah as well.
Awesome. That's good. I appreciate that. First time we met, I'm like, you're a lot taller in person than you are over Zoom, man. So I'm 6'4", so it's rare that I get to meet a lot of people who can look at me straight in the eye. So I appreciate it. No, thanks for that. Okay. So my name's Cory Procter. I own Pro Capital Wealth Management. It's a financial firm here in South Lake, Texas, located in Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And so we specialize, we do financial planning, minimum $1 million investable assets with an emphasis in asset protection. It's based on my story. I got sued in high school, rear-ended a lady, which really applies to the topic at hand today. But rear-ended a lady, and because the Suburban was in my folks' titled in their name, My mom and my stepdad, they filed for bankruptcy a year later and lost the house and the vehicles. And so I got to see that coming back freshman year of college to them starting over in the apartment. And it just kind of sat on me. And so I ended up playing pro ball 6 years in the NFL, mostly in Dallas. And that was just a thing that kind of sat in the back of my head was I wasn't really impressed with somebody who can go get me big returns. I just didn't want somebody stealing my money. And so, you know, basically made it a mission to learn everything I could about what was going on in my portfolios or my businesses or anything that I was a part of. And I asked a lot of stupid questions that eventually got smarter. And so 15 years removed from the league, my wife and I are in a lot better place today financially than we ever were playing football, and which I know is not the norm. But it ended up being the premise of the business, standing guard, building legacy, making sure the castle couldn't get stolen from underneath you. So this ends up being a really a pertinent subject. I'm married. My wife is the best thing in the world. She is a big sweetheart, but she will stab you in the neck if you get out of line, right? And then we have 3 kids, 10 girl, boy, girl, 10, 5, and 1. And Grace, Hank, and Faith, and they are the best things that have happened to us. So we are in the thick of it in our busy lives, and but I love it. So it's a great place to be. And here at Pro Capital, we have handful of teammates, but we are pushing forward and have an awesome growth mode going on. But that's us. So let's do this. I want to jump into the meat of it, and we're going to get into this first part is it's four. It's not exclusive to these four, but 4 really prominent silent killers to your business. And it could be losing your business, killing the value of your business, or just taking away the protection that you want in that business. And so we'll start off with number 1, which is, and if you guys got a pad and paper, I'd tell you to write it down. I got my notes that I printed off for this, but I encourage you to write this down. You'll get it and you'll get a transcription afterwards, but write this down because pen to paper just has something where it solidifies in your brain. But number 1 is handshake deals. And in this, we've done this a lot. Right. A lot of people have done this. My dad did this for baling hay on the land just not too long ago. And talking about handshake deals when we're doing business. And I appreciate it because let's go back to the times when people abided by their word and honored that. And that is a big deal. And I get it. But we also live in an area live in a time in our lives where over 40 million civil suits are filed every year. That was something that I took into account for my business or my dealings was, the average, this was a study done in 2017 that the average person or average American has an over 30% chance of being sued in their lifetime. And if there's 40 million civil suits every year, given our population, that's a 11 to 12% chance of any given time of getting sued. And I thought about it in 2017, I think the average income was about 50 grand. And if you park in our neighborhood, which the average income is about 200 grand, how much more does that statistic potentially rise? And then for me, when I was playing football, you put a star on the side of your helmet for the Dallas Cowboys, how much more of a target do you become then? And so even more so, which some of you guys can relate to as a business owner, the smell of money is in the air and people get attracted to it. Or even the illusion, you may not be cash flow heavy in your business, but because you own the business, people just assume you have it all. And so this ends up being a big topic of discussion, but I want to throw it to Eric. When handshake deals, like what have you seen in your experience? What's the big downfall, or what do you think of first when we talk about this?
Yeah, it's such a good point. There's kind of a joke in our office. I could walk back into the office and I often say, we're never going to go out of business. And that's mostly because, and by the way, remember, I don't do a lot of areas of law. What I focus on is business law. I focus on owners of business, entrepreneurs who are growing, building, and doing things. And so you got to think about that. A lot of people are in that mindset. I like that mindset. In fact, I love it. I consider it a privilege to work with these people that are so forward looking, trying to create, trying to build, really give value, so much value that people just want to pay them. They just want to give them their money because they create so much value. So in that mindset, what often happens is that the owners, the partners, the ones that have that mindset, they sort of myopically think everybody else sees it the same way. And so nobody's going to screw them over. Nobody is, especially my partner. I mean, we're coming together. We're doing this together. I wouldn't do it with them unless I trusted them in the first place. And
Right.
so I love doing business. I'm going to go forward, and yeah, we don't need those lawyers. We don't need all that legal, contract. But look, my word is my bond. So that's kind of riffing off a little bit of what you said, Cory. If you think about it, though, life always happens to us. Things seem to always find a way to change in life. And all of a sudden, one of us or more of us of the ownership of the business, for example, find themselves in a hard way. And when those things happen, when something's not in writing, all of a sudden, the whole story changes, the whole narrative, it gets rewritten because people are like, well, no, this is what I understood. And by the way, I really need this distribution because, my son, my whatever has got this illness, and I gotta like when money issues come up in the cash flow of a business, all of a sudden somebody's going to be desperate, and in desperation, you cannot now write the proper agreement between you. You haven't captured anything about how things are supposed to go when X, Y, or Z happen. So without the contract, it's like anybody's game. You just why don't you just hire me, and they'll go hire somebody else, and us lawyers will have a good time, and you'll pay us a lot of money to fight a battle that probably, well, should have never happened. But even if it does come up, it quickly gets squelched or dealt with or handled or resolved because you have the document in place to take care of it.
Hmm. That makes me, when I think of a handshake deal, as much as I love them, right? Because I want to be that man, a man of his word. I think of that. What I immediately think with no contract in place or no formal agreement in place, I think of something like this is, we hire a new employee or maybe even marriage, right? You're getting married to your spouse. If there's no expectation set, it's a recipe for destruction in a relationship potentially. And it's not just, money or business lost, it's relationship lost too. And I think of that a lot of times, because we talk about like even hiring family and friends into your business. And if we don't set expectations, well, your assumption is going to be could be totally different than mine. I just assume that, this is how I grew up. That's not how you grew up. And you should see it my way. And of course, then all of a sudden, where we were once in alignment, that starts taking apart that view. And now we lead all the way to legal battle. And I can speak from experience on this where if I had someone threaten lawsuit even in my business, and because it wasn't articulated, what they tried to come at me with, it was articulated, it was specified provisional items within my documents that we were well within our time frame to execute these plans, and so they had no case, and so everything was dropped immediately. But I tell you what, you don't think I was thanking my attorney for helping draw up these documents, right? For getting this stuff done, because I could point right to the provisions and say, hey, I appreciate you, but we are in our agreement and expectations set.
Right. Yeah. And when you have it set up front, it just makes everything so easy. Think about it this way. We trust, we don't have time, we're running and gunning because we're really growing and building. We want to implement this. We got to get our business off the ground. That's all awesome things. It's fantastic for people to have that kind of energy and vibe and that's happening. But if you don't all you need is just to stop for a few minutes, sit down and think through some of these eventualities that we all believe will never happen. But to think about them, to talk about them, and then to capture it in writing, to have a contract. And this goes with your partners. This goes with your vendors, those people who really allow you to do your business the way you want to do it. It goes with your customers, especially depending on what type of business you have. Those customers are really critical in your relationship with them. And it goes with your employees for sure, especially those who are more of a upper management type of a position where you have to think a lot about compensation. There's those areas that if you just stop and capture it up front, it's a little bit uncomfortable. Trust me, I sit down with clients and I make them have these conversations, but there's some real value when and then I could just, once they're starting to have them and they go, okay, yeah, that makes sense, and they capture them, I get to memorialize them. Like that's sometimes the easier part for me as the attorney is capturing what they've agreed. The harder part is getting them to sit down and actually just have discussions about it so they can make decisions. Because again, they don't want to because they don't think it's ever going to happen. That's the biggest thing I feel like I'm faced with is grabbing my client by the ear and saying, no, you got to listen to this. Just hear me out here. Because if you guys understand each other and you think about, well, what happens if someone gets divorced? What happens if somebody has a disability? What if it's just a temporary disability versus a long-term disability? You know, we both have ownership, so to speak, and we need to deal with, you know, what if someone's a key player and now they're out for 6 months because of some accident? How do you make up the difference? So like all of these things can be discussed. What if someone passes away? Well, you have one of the partners pass away. Well, what about, okay, who takes over their ownership? Their estate does, and their estate usually means their spouse. And that spouse, I mean, they may be fantastic at business, but nobody knows it because that spouse hasn't been a part of the business. And the remaining partner's like, well, I don't want to do business with somebody's spouse who is in a completely different industry and not in ours. You know, those sort of things. That's why it's so valuable to just have a contract. You create the expectations. You memorialize the expectations and understand it solves. Here's the tagline I always use: an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Cory, I can sit here and give you an example after example of clients who, had they spent the money up front, they would have saved themselves not just 10x, not just 20x, but even 100x what they have to deal with now to fix the problem. Now that we've got to cure the problem, rather, now that we've got this problem that honestly could have been, if not entirely, very close to completely avoid it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had a buddy. I'm actually almost done with trademarking my stuff right now, and that came from, if anybody else has gotten these spam emails, you know, it's partly that, but came from, I have a buddy who owns his financial firm here in Fort Worth, and he had a verbal agreement with a guy who owned another company with the same name. So companies both had the same name, but different industries. And they were fine with it, but the guy sold his company. And so when they came back about it, and he had rights of commerce. So when the new guy came back and got his legal team on it, they called him up and gave him a cease and desist and sent a letter. And so ended up, he told me, I think it was like 50 or 60 grand to rebrand everything, but he lost all of the brand equity that he had built over the years building his business. And that was a trigger for me where I'm like, all right, let's get it done. So, but it's a big deal. So it just shows the importance of that. Let's do this. Let's move on. Number 2, that was handshake deals. These are 4 silent killers, right? Number 2 is wrong business structure that you can have with them. So this is a big deal with us. This could be wrong business structure or none at all. But as we get into wealth planning, financial planning, any sort of advisory or consulting, a big issue that we look at is for titling of assets, because it supersedes all wills or trust. And where a lot of people come in and, you know, they might have an estate plan done or have some really good planning in place, but it's all chopped up or it's not done. It's very incomplete. And I know you can speak to this, but I see a lot of people there, and so they're overexposed in lawsuit. We had a great couple come in that are big dogs in the energy business, and they had 7 rental properties in their personal name, house in the personal name in the state of Texas, which is a probate issue, not a creditor issue. But what happened is all of a sudden, and this is the interesting stuff to me because this specific couple, they just had an insurance question that their guy didn't want to answer or didn't answer on or whatever it was, and so they were interested in talking. So we come out and find out, well, 7 rental properties in their personal name. Well, one of those renters slips and falls and breaks their leg and decides to sue, kiss the 7 rentals goodbye, kiss the big brokerage accounts goodbye, and anything else potentially, and start over, right? And so talk a little bit about how, and this could be a tax issue also, but talk a little bit about what you've seen in as somebody having the wrong or lack of business structure.
Yeah, I would say a couple points. One is that oftentimes business owners don't really take the time to think about what kind of structure they should have. And what I mean by that is when they're starting off, they don't hire the right professionals, like a business attorney or a financial planner who's dealt a lot with this, or a CPA who could say, hey, this is how the things are going to go in tax treatment. So you got to remember when they're first starting, they don't have all those thoughts because they're just focused on building and growing and making things happen. But now they've built, they've grown, and they're killing it in the business. But they don't ever go back to their structure to think about and ask the question, hey, maybe I ought to look at this. Because when you don't do that, now you're stuck to maybe a structure that worked for a time, but then now you're trying to expand, you're growing, or you're thinking about, I want to sort of exit out of this at some point and retire, and what do I do at that point? We'll get into a lot of that in a minute, but if you're not stopping and thinking about it, then what happens is other things creep in, like I'm gonna, maybe I've got a structure of a C corp or an S corp, or maybe it's an LLC. But then when I enter into this lease, and it's a 10-year lease with some pretty big numbers to it on a monthly basis, which means you've got 5 or 7 years or 10 years of that kind of an obligation. Oftentimes you'll sign the lease as the entity, hopefully, but then you'll personally guarantee it, which is kind of like, well, wait a minute, why did you do that? And someone would ask, well, I can't get the lease unless I personally guarantee it. To which I always say, well, you can at least ask. And you know how many times, Cory, I've gotten my clients out from under the lease? If not initially, I'll build in there a wasting away language or provision that says, for the next 3 years, I'm all on, I'll guarantee you. But if I have perfect track record of making payments, always on time, never late, then at the end of 3 years, I'm out. I'm out from underneath it. And then that extends not just to the remainder of the term, like say if you needed to or wanted to move and sublease this out or assign it to somebody, or you wanted to renew for a second term, you don't have a personal guarantee for the entire time. And there are too many elements about the market, about the industries, about things that businesses face to not be thinking about how do you keep from getting that personal guarantee. That relates back because somebody isn't paying attention to the structure of their business. These things aren't on their mind, and they go to sign their lease and they just go, okay, broker, give me a deal. All right, fine, let's do it. But there's a lot of gotchas that can happen in there if things have changed, if circumstances in the market or your own personal business or things need to change where you're trying to get out of it and turn it over to somebody else. So it becomes something that the wrong business structure does come back to haunt you a little bit. And the collateral that sort of stems from that, like big leases, equipment leases, depending on what kind of business you're in, or things like that, it does capture because you don't want to find yourself personally guaranteeing. Because I'll guarantee you one thing. The thing that private or personal injury attorneys or even employment attorneys on the plaintiff side are good at is finding where the deep pockets are. And they will do everything they can to find how deep your pockets are. And even if it's not a claim that's going to make you lose all 7 apartment complexes, you're going to have to pay full and top dollar for that claim if they know they have all the money that's sitting behind it, because they know you have an incentive to get this to just go away, even if, Cory, it's just a nuisance value type of a case.
It's crazy. It's crazy. You immediately make me think of great book, if anybody wants, is Made in America by Sam Walton. And he shares that was his first legal lesson he ever had to learn the hard way was, and I forget the franchise, but he had a franchise, a five and dime store that he became one of the top in the nation at. And he had outgrown his small town in Arkansas, but his lease was up and he couldn't renew the lease. There was a provision within the lease that the owner of the building had a first right of refusal, but he was able to force him to sell him the business. And somehow, and I couldn't tell you exactly what it doesn't flesh it out completely, I don't think. But the owner of the building wanted to buy the five and dime store for his son to operate. And so it forced a sale, and Sam Walton had to move his family to a whole different town and start over on his five and dime, which probably was a good thing for him in the end that he learned that lesson, but a hard one to learn, no less, right? It's
Well, and you think about those. I mean, we're all going to get our education. You either get it at formal education or you get it on the streets. Like somehow you're going to pay for your education. But in a situation like that, what if somebody had helped him understand that and know that, yeah, he catapulted off that and turned it into something that was, I mean, pretty successful, right? But at the same time, I'll bet you when he was going through it, he didn't feel that way, right? A lot of loss with it that I believe can be avoided with a little bit more knowledge. So things like this, business owners should be kind of gathering in and paying attention one, so to better understand it, and two, to surround themselves with people that can sort of act as that advisor for them so that they think through all these issues when they get into it. I mean, I don't know if there's ever a time I've sat down with an agreement and not had anything to say about it. And I don't mean that I just was trying to create work for myself. It was more of, hey, if I'm you right now, knowing what I know, and if I were you as stepping into your shoes, you need to know this. Even when the client in many cases says, okay, thank you for letting me know, I'm going to take the risk anyway. But just the fact that they're aware and they know, it helps them pay attention to kind of the overall 3,000-foot level, which is kind of getting back to the whole topic of figuring out what the right business structure is. Because what you choose now or what you're in the middle of, you want to make sure for future planning, so to speak, what and how you need to have that business set up so that at some point you can exit, whatever that exit looks like, right? Like, I'm going to hand it over to my children. That's one very, very, popular way and a good way too. I think it's awesome. Or key business or key employees who are just dialed in the business and they know everything about it and they've almost taken on the owner-like characteristics and they're superstars, they're rock stars. Or an investor coming in, or how about a competitor who's like, you know what, I'm sick of competing with this guy. I'm just going to buy him out, In any one of those scenarios, now it really does matter what your business structure is. And then on top of that, how well you're organized within that structure to sort of create this, hey, I'm ready to rock and roll. I've got it all set up. Let's make it happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, that's a great. You're segueing into number three on the list right now, and that's no exit or succession plan, right? And so this is, and I crack up at this, but this is big in our business too, where no exit, no succession plan. The average, I think, age of advisor or any wealth manager is about 60, and it's a really interesting industry, but for us, there's a lot of opportunity because for every 10 retiring, only 3 are replacing. And so, and even then, about 70% of children or the assets are not staying at the firm of the parents, but are leaving. The children are taking them somewhere else. And so it's interesting because even here you have these guys that they have no plan at all on who to give it to, no extra person. It might be a mom and pop shop. I'll tell you, I had this conversation with my dad because he's a large animal veterinarian, worked on thoroughbred horses his whole life. And he always talked about he loved working on cattle more, but the money was in the horses. And so, but at the end of his career, he just shut it off, shut it down. And that was it. And he had an amazing book of high value clients that he could have done something with, but he opted not to. But as we get into this picture in our our business, you got to risk it to get the biscuit. There's a rhyme for you. But as we look at this exit or succession plan, like obviously there is an exit at some point, right? Either you quit and shut the doors, or you die and give it to your kids, and maybe they don't want it, right? But kick us off on this. Like, what are the biggest issues that you see when it comes, even if they don't have any plan, especially, it's probably some of the worst.
Oh,
Worst pieces.
It's horrible. It really is. I can tell you, there's a few experiences I've had that have like been seared into my mind, and I won't go through all those. It's just a disaster, complete and total disaster. And in that case, there was a business owner. It was an optometrist and had so many good things going. Unfortunately, life took him early. And it just created a big mess with the family. And by the way, because there was none of that planning, both on the estate planning side, but also on the business side, there was nothing set up in the business to allow it to really transfer. I mean, other optometrists were just coming by and just kind of picking and choosing and grabbing because, well, all those patients just lost their doctor, right? And so where do they go now? And so there wasn't any way to monetize it for one. But then you have all that together, it created a fabulous mess with the whole family, and still probably is creating that. And that's now happened 7 or 8 years ago. So let me fast forward real quick. I got a client right now, just amazing business people when it comes to creating, and they've got their business property developers. They've got over 80 projects. They're just humming along. Some of them have a little, hiccups here and there, but generally they're just killing it. So as I'm talking to them and we're learning about them, I'm realizing they, on the corporate side of things, they are a total disaster. Now, it's okay right now because they all completely get along. But there are other people that it impacts. And then it's going to impact other people. And I am having these conversations, telling them, you really should consider how you address these issues. And one of the big things you got to do is get your whole mess cleaned up. You need a clean legal bill of health. You really do. The problem with that is right now, it's pretty overwhelming for them to think about it. So my job is to somehow get in there and help them see how do we take little bites here and there so that we can kind of work our way. Because at the end of the day, whatever you do is your succession plan, whatever you do. And unfortunately, too many people don't do anything because, I don't know why, just human nature just thinks I have time to do that later. Well, let me, real quick, as I've worked with business owners who are at the end of their career, so to speak, and they want to retire and they want to enjoy their life, and they've got investments and they're doing things, they're pretty well set. Like nothing's going to be like totally, pressuring them. But I open up the book, the treatise that lawyers look into, say, hey, what are all the different angles and ways that we can transfer our business, which is our legacy, right, over to somebody else. And the very first paragraph, it says to the attorney, hey, attorney, if you're helping a business owner with their succession plan, their exit plan, you need to remind them it's going to take a solid 5 to 10 years to come up with a plan they're really satisfied with. one that they understand, it makes sense, and that they're satisfied. And then I would add to that, it didn't say this in the treatise, but I would add to it, if you want to monetize all the value you've created as a business owner, and frankly, Cory, the business owners I work with, they're a blast to work with because they're so productive. They do so many good things. They create so much value. They give livelihood to so many people. And if you want to monetize that, you really need to focus on how and get clarity about what that is actually, not just what you think it is in your head, but what it is actually. So when you capture it and you understand it, you now have very much a self-managing business, one that almost, I mean, that's the goal. Hey, client, figure out how to just get this business so it manages itself. Because when it does that, now it doesn't matter if you as the business owner, the founder, the entrepreneur are even involved, because you've created such a solid business. And I'll tell you, I think there's a very close correlation between having a self-managing business and having a clean legal bill of health, or vice versa. When you focus on it, when we say, hey, we need to tighten this up, these documents, you got these gaps, and that's why we had to file this lawsuit or get sued or whatever. You tighten those things up, you've now fixed so many of the things that have created problems. You have a self-managing business. And when you have that, now the planning for succession, man, that's you can really dial in and really get creative. And that's where I say, okay, now that you got your mindset in the right place, let's get your team. You need more than just me as your attorney. You need a really good, if you don't have a CFO or a controller that's like on salary, well, then find a fractional one that can help you, that really understands and becomes part of your team in all the finances and all the accounting and all the taxes. And then I say, you really need to find a fantastic financial planner that can play the same role, because the CFO or the CPA or the attorney or even the estate planning attorney or whoever, we're not going to be the ones that help you really grow and make things happen on the financial side. You need someone, because that goes hand in hand. Having somebody who can understand and know your finances, that is talking to the person that is the estate planning attorney, the one estate planning attorney that actually specializes, really good at it, not just basic estate plans, but somebody who's like totally dialed in. And then an attorney who's a business guy who's like, okay, like I understand all that other stuff, but it's not my specialty, right? That's why we bring them in. So I'm probably talking too long there, Cory, but
you're good. No, well, you hit on things that I crack up that like we run into. We talk about that. Run to attorneys that like, well, we just do wills and trusts on the side for some side business. And I'm like, that's not, so you're not really good at what you do. You're just doing it to capture more business, which I appreciate, but like at the same time, you're not that great.
Or they might be great at that, but you're talking about a very basic, simple estate plan. And frankly, there's a lot of the population that's all they need. But when you're talking to business owners who are killing it, making money and making things happen, not just for them, but for a whole bunch of people on their team, now you need somebody who does estate planning, who understands it on a much higher level.
Right. Those are, and just so you guys know, big things that I think about on the financial planning and wealth advisory side is when we talk about some sort of exit or succession plan, I don't just think about this big number I'm trying to sell the business for. That's not what that's cool. We want to get the biggest valuation out of our business that we can. That's great. But I'm also thinking about what happens if death, disability, or divorce, right? And like, if I'm in a partner with somebody and he dies, do I like his wife enough where I want to be a partner with her now? And because that's not always the case. So we ask the case, is their spouse cool? Do you like them? I'm not really that close with them. Well, they're going to be your partner here pretty soon if something happens, right? Or, and so if we don't have any agreements in place to cover that, fund it, whatever, that becomes an issue. And then a real big one for me is the estate tax issue. And right, we have a real practical one to think about is the end of this year is the sunset of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And so our estate tax at a federal level is going to cut in half to anywhere between 6 and 7 million. I can't remember the exact number, but and so it cuts in half. And in the state of Texas, we don't have a state estate tax, so we're lucky there. But it's different in other states like West Virginia that has a state estate tax and has an inheritance tax. And so if you have a big a valued business, like this is pretty common. We run into clients that have, I have like a $30 million business or $40 million business valuation. Well, if that's the bulk, which is largely the case, if that's the bulk of your net worth and you pass and that's what it gets valued at your death, we're solving right now one has a $3 million estimated federal tax bill due that we're solving for right now, right? And in their low 40s. Well, that's a young couple. It has a whole lot of horizon for a way bigger bill, right? And so the fact of the matter is, okay, you die, where are the kids taking the money from? Where are they taking the money from? Is it going to be, now we're forced to not just maybe fire sell an illiquid asset or maybe take money on a down market. We're potentially having to sell the business if we don't have liquidity or can borrow to get liquidity to do that. And so these are the things that I start thinking about is in that succession planning or exit plan, have we covered for those issues, which are the likely ones, right? Is something happens to me and I'm out. And so we don't want that to be the case. So those are big. Let's do this. Keep moving. I want to give some quick hit. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. We're going to try to hit some quick hit answers here towards the end. But number 4 we have here is no coordination between legal and financial teams. And so a big one that I see here that you can speak to is the estate plan is not funded. And so I'll tell you 99% of the time when we have somebody that comes within a first meeting, we're pretty good at estate planning. I feel like there's a bunch of people in our business that are not. And so there's some pretty specific provisions that we ask about, but 99% of the time, a very stupid high number. I haven't found one where the estate was fully funded. And meaning what I mean by that is when you do an estate plan, that's totally different than your estate. You do a financial plan, it's totally different than your actual finances, right? And it means nothing if it's actually not actually executed on. And so the trust is just a vehicle. A will is instruction for probate. For anybody that doesn't know those problems, is probate is a public process. Your mom, anybody and their mom can see what you left and who you left it to. And how about you? I've lived a public enough life. I don't really care to share to certain people in my family what we have built, and because that's private information. And then 2, it's contestable, right? And so meaning somebody close enough to your family can file claim or contest your estate or contest the probate. By law, the judge has to open it up, which could last up to 3 years potentially, tying up any benefit that may be there for your kids or whoever else. And had a buddy if they provide a good enough case, the judge can redirect assets even if it's a will, and because it's just instruction for probate. And so, anyways, I say that meaning if the teams aren't together rowing the boat in the same direction and we're not working together, you and I, in some capacity, the legal work that you're getting done might not always be getting tied together the way it should, right? And so that's where I see a lot of things fall apart. Is like, well, the trust should have taken care of that. Well, the trust wasn't funded, so that titling of assets supersedes everything. And so if it's not funded correctly, then there's potential threats. And so this is where we like to come in and step in on that and really make sure the team gets on board. Tell me, same thing for you, when you're not coordinating the team, where do you see things fall apart?
No, I mean, you're dead on so many of those things, Cory. I could tell you a story about every single one of those points and multiple stories. And it makes so much sense to coordinate with your professionals and having them coordinate with each other. In fact, there's a number of times where I've just said, look, I'm happy to sit down and talk to you about this. However, I refuse to do it until you have an appointment set up with your financial planner or with your CPA or even with your risk manager, your insurance agent, depending on what they've got going on in their business and stuff. And I almost force that meeting together and your estate planning attorney, again, I know a lot about it, but I'm not that specialty. So I will leave that to others. I said to my client, think about it this way. I kind of give them the lecture that you just said, Cory, to make it sense that let's get them all together. I know it might feel like, well, wait a minute. That's kind of a hefty bill to get all those people in the same room. Like, I get that. Okay. So pick whatever number you want to pretend that's your bill is for that particular hour or two. Now, compare that to the number of all the taxes you're going to pay on a 30 or 40 million dollar estate tax, and anything over, the estate tax exclusion. Now, okay, so like, how does that compare, people? But it's more than that, Cory. Again, I'm a big believer in my clients informing themselves. They don't need to know how I actually craft the document and write the provisions. They don't need every single one of them. They don't need to have all the background. I mean, they just need to have somebody on their team that is going to pay attention to those things, highlight it, bring it to their attention so that they then can make decisions, and they're given some advice about how to do that. Because you're right. I mean, the simplest things. Let's say somebody decides to, they've got some financing on a home and they decide to refinance it. Well, not everybody pays attention, and not all the time do they let their attorneys know that's what took place. Well, the lender's not going to give them a loan without them putting in their individual name. And the lender doesn't care about having them put it back into their family trust. They just do it. And now you've defunded your trust from that particular property. And it's like, wait a minute. And so, like in California, there's what's referred to as a Headstead petition that allows you to say, Judge, can we please avoid like not having to go through the whole probate system? I mean, we had a trust, we had it in there once. It was just a mistake, it wasn't there. And the judge will grant that. And so it's sort of an abbreviated probate, but only will they grant it if nobody objects to it. Right. And so if they do object, full-blown probate, I mean, it's a minimum of 9. It's really more like 12 months that you're going to have to deal with that. But it usually, especially if it's a valuable probate, you're talking 2.5, 3 years. I mean, I've sat in meetings because my client, business owner, one of the the beneficiaries or would-be beneficiary, or is now a beneficiary. And it was crazy. Okay, there were 8 different parties that were beneficiaries, and the decedent had a lot of money, and the decedent didn't really coordinate much of anything. In fact, that person even wanted to do things sort of on their own, and they invalidated a prior trust, and then another one was drafted up because someone didn't show up to the Christmas party, and they invalidated it. It was a total mess. It was over 8 people at the mediation, and I counted up the dollars that were spent on that day, and it was a full 10-hour day of mediation with the mediator's costs and every party's attorney, and guessing what their rate was based off of mine and all that stuff. Like no joke, it had to have been over $11,000 for one day's worth of stupid disputes. Like, just that's it. And that didn't even count for all the fees that led up by every attorney who had to get prepared and position their client the way they could, and it's just a mess. So those things will happen, and you always, I mean, I'm talking a little bit more specific to just get your estate planning done. But the problem is if you're not coordinating with each other, with the other legal, financial, and accounting type teammates for the client, you're going to miss something. And now, what really is a bummer from my perspective, this is why I'm sort of sensitive about it, because I won't let this happen. I've seen professionals start pointing the finger at each other, like, well, that was your job. No. Like I titled it right, or whatever it is. All of that can be avoided. It's totally unnecessary if you just do a little bit of coordination. Plus, by the way, now, like you and I meeting, if we shared a client, we can talk shop in a way that is actually accomplishes what needs to be done so much quicker because we're understanding the same terminology when the clients oftentimes they just don't understand, or if they do, they don't care, they don't want to understand, they just want to hire people to do that because they want to go do their thing.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's huge. I want to say this. If you guys have questions, we got 9 minutes before the top of the hour. If you got questions, put them in the chat box. What I want to do this, I want to make sure we end on time, but let's hit some quick items that everybody can get to right away. Maybe some actionables or things that they can look at. And, we'll start with number one, handshake deals. The obvious here is let's get contracts in. Let's get a formal agreement in, right? I think we can all be in agreement that the best relationships in our lives are the ones that are giving and reciprocating. And so, meaning you've had this situation, right? Like, man, I'm paying for dinner tonight because you guys paid last time, or you guys have had us over so much. Like, I gotta take care of you. That's somebody that reciprocates. Well, in the handshake deal, it's like, man, no, let's do this the right way. I trust you. We wouldn't be in this if we didn't, but let's make sure we just take care of each other in this and our families so that, if there's something happens from both of us, we can abide by these rules, right? I
So
think
Cory,
that's
let me
easiest
jump
for number
in.
one. Go
Let me
ahead.
to that point, a really quick and actionable item for anybody who's listening, a business owner, just stop and think for a second. What relationship do you have in the running your business that's really sort of bothering you for one reason or another? And it could be partners, other owners, it could be an employee, sort of one of your key employees, it could be vendors, it could be, partnerships with whoever it is. Just stop and think, which one of those are you struggling with and trying to figure out, what do I do with? I'm guessing you all have one. So if you have one, one of the easier things to do that it will actually get you so much further almost immediately is, one, have a conversation. If you must, go into the conversation with the top three things you need to talk about with that particular person. Have a conversation, not to make necessarily a decision on that spot, but have a conversation to share, to get it off your chest. As soon as you leave that conversation, do number two, and that is write down a recap summary of what you just talked about with that particular individual, and say, today we discussed A, B, and C, and as a result we agreed to X, Y, and Z. That recap, it doesn't have to be that specific on the recap, but the more you can be specific in the recap, now all of a sudden you're going to send it over to them and you're going to have more clarity about that particular relationship than you ever had. It might be so that trouble's going to arise. Well, maybe, but if it's going to arise, it's going to arise today when you have the conversation, or tomorrow after you send them the recap, or 10 years from now. When do you want to deal with it? Now or 10 years from now when it gets even harder to deal with? So just a very simple thing. Have a conversation, maybe go in it with a couple bullet points, and after you're done, recap what that conversation was. When you send the recap, you'll now all of a sudden have so much more clarity about what that relationship is and what it looks like. Once you do that, then come talk to your attorney and say, all right, this is what we need to put into writing.
Heck yeah, that's perfect right there. Let's quick hit the last three here just to make sure we stay on time. It's wrong business structure, no exit, a succession plan, no coordination between legal and financial teams. I would say this, my big pieces here, practically, if you're not sure about your business structure, this could be a few things. For us, it's titling of assets. My big thing is we look at the balance sheet and go look at how your house is titled if it's in your personal name, how your bank accounts and your investment accounts are titled, are they in your personal name, and who are the beneficiaries of these things. Are your rental properties, how are those titled? Are they in? And generally, as we look at layers, insurance, entity structures, then we go into estate plans. So how are these things flowing down as first lines of defense for somebody for asset protection? and to make sure it flows correctly, right? And so I would look at those, anything potentially in your name, there's caveats here, is a problem potentially. So look at those things and list them out and make sure that redline those that, hey, you need to have a conversation with your professional about this. And if they don't know the potential, then okay, you need to flesh that out with somebody, okay? Because it is an issue. Bo just asked if I practice in California. Yes, I have clients there. And California is a whole nother mess in itself, right? That's a big deal. Appreciate it, Bo. No exit succession plan is kind of the obvious, but we can get agreements in place to cover you for death, disability, or divorce in those situations. And I don't speak those problems into anybody, right? But the realities of our world. And so you want to make sure that we can get that right succession plan. We can reduce estate tax bills and get some asset protection within it to make sure it flows right to your kids or to your partners or to the key employees or to whoever you need. And then make sure your people are talking, your financials, all of them are talking and rowing both in the same direction. Eric, give me some quick hits on what you think on those.
Yeah,
Same thing.
fantastic. I love what you said. I would just add to the succession plan, the exit plan, start having the conversation today. Do not wait. I don't care if you plan on working another 20 years. Start the discussion because it'll get your mind thinking bigger on more important aspects, on the critical things that you need to be working on as a business owner to get to your self-managing business. You need to understand what it looks like. You don't think you'll deal with that later. Don't come to me and say, hey, it's May right now. I want to be able to get rid of I sell my business by December of 2025. And I'm going to say, well, I mean, we can do that, but I'm going to tell you, you're going to leave a lot of money on the table if this is the first time you're talking about this succession plan. So talk about it, address it. You find someone to help you discuss those things early. The earlier you do, the more clarity you get, the more clarity you have, the better business you run. It all flows together. Other than that, I think you stated it very well, Cory.
That's awesome, man. I appreciate it. Eric, do me a favor. We're going to end right on time. This is fantastic. I love it. Where next steps, if somebody wants to call, obviously, if we didn't have any other questions that you guys maybe think of later, I want you guys to be able to get a hold of our firms. Where's the best place to get a hold of you?
Yeah, jeppsonlaw.com or ejeppson@jeppsonlaw.com is my email. Best way to reach out, and be happy to answer any questions based on what we've talked about today.
Awesome. Same thing. We're here to coordinate. ProCapitalTX.com is our firm, or you can reach out. We have all the social channels, but that's the place to go on, especially if you're chewing on whether you're a fit, you need a person, or what you're looking for in a financial professional. But go check those avenues out. Or if you have a question, same route, you can ask those questions in. We're going to put the recording on here. Man, I'm super thankful for you guys showing up. Eric, I'm trying to catch up to you kids wise. I don't have 7, only got 3. So we'll see if my wife can let me have 4 more.
It's yeah. I don't know. Yeah, catch up, please. You would love it, but brace yourself.
Hey, Eric, man, thank you so much for sharing today and being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It's fantastic. Thank you, Cory.
Hey, thanks, guys. Well, take care. Talk to you soon.